Welcome to this BOHS webinar on COVID-19 and the return to work. My name is Kevin Bampton. I'm the Chief Executive of BOHS, and I'm joined by Alex Wilson. Excuse me. So Alex is our Honorary Secretary and probably one of the sort of longest standing members of our board and occupational hygienist, group occupational hygienist at Johnson Matthey. So he's going to take you through the technical content. I'm going to introduce you to the approach that BOHS has taken in putting together this guidance. You may have noticed that transparency is a really important part of the debate about COVID, and we wanted you to understand how we approach this, but also why we think it's so important to take a broad-based approach to the return to work and COVID-19. So to take you through our approach, it might be worthwhile starting to explain what the British Occupational Hygiene Society is about. We are the Chartered Society for Worker Health Protection. We're a scientific society with a very impressive track record of impact. A lot of the major changes to UK legislation in relation to workplace exposure have come as a result of the work of the society and the scientists who are members of it. And we are also the representative organisation for the UK's occupational hygiene professionals. As well as that, we are a standard setting and qualifications body, and you may have come across the work that we do, for example, in asbestos, where we set the qualification standards for asbestos monitoring and analysis throughout the world. Like most organisations, we have had to respond to COVID-19, both internally, but as a health-focused organisation, we've also had to look at how we engage with others and develop our role in helping attack this particularly nasty exposure. So our leadership and communication, obviously from my point of view as CEO, the head office provides the support for communication, things like this webinar. The presidential trio, that's our president-elect, our current president, who's Kelvin Williams, and our immediate past president, providing, if you like, the immediate day-to-day guidance, enabling us to be quickly reacting to issues, and the board who oversee us. But at the heart of what we do is bringing together the experts who form the heart of the society. And we've had two very, very active expert groups, one working respiratory protection, particularly around respiratory protection equipment, and the other, which is the subject of this particular webinar, is the return to work group. And that's a group that is constituted of experts who are doing this for large organisations, people who are working within the public sector, producing other forms of guidance, as well as academics. So it's a very mixed group of expertise. And we've been able to draw on the kind engagement of a number of other organisations who contributed their view. This is a collective endeavour, this fight against COVID-19, and we've fed into the Occupational Health Multidisciplinary Forum, especially around the expertise that we have in prevention. And the focus of a lot of that work has been on healthcare workers and their protection. And as well as that, we have a direct link to the Health and Safety Executive, who have the unenviable task of setting standards and creating guidance to ensure a safe workplace from a governmental point of view. So those of you who are familiar with the British Occupational Hygiene Society or occupational hygiene will know that at the real core of occupational hygiene is the notion of prevention, anticipating problems before they happen. And BOHS was one of the first, if not the first, UK scientific organisation at the very beginning of lockdown to say that they thought that we would have some problems, not just with tackling COVID-19, but the consequences of shutting down industry. We've worked in partnership because occupational health within the workplace is about prevention, it is about health monitoring, but it's also about ergonomics, it's about a whole series of other factors. And so we've taken that partnership approach to inform how we've built these guidance. And we've drawn on expertise, not just scientific expertise and academic expertise, but practical experience from industry, because all the guidance in the world won't be of value unless it is informed by practice. We take a tactical focus on the specific problem of COVID-19 and the prevention of infection and exposure across the workplaces. But in addition to that, we continue to take a strategic view. All of the workplaces that we will encounter will contain exposures that are not just COVID-19 related, but other things. And it is the focus on those things that makes our approach quite unique of the information that's available at the moment. CIPD, sort of in their guidance, highlights the importance of planning, the preventative approach. Employers need to plan now. The guiding principle should be how organisations take care of their people and safeguard their health and well-being. And there are real issues that we have to address. So there hasn't been an example of a shutdown like this across industries. So we got the issue of cold startup, starting processes that were never meant to stop. Add to that the notion that a lot of organisations stopped fast and now have to catch up on monitoring the substances they have, catch up on the inspections, on the checks that keep us safe. Adding to that is the need to avoid liabilities, and I'll talk a little bit further about that, but avoiding the statutory problems that might arise from the fact that you haven't been in operation. On top of that, you can heap the social distancing and other hygiene measures that are needed to address COVID-19. And then there's the workforce resilience issues, the problem that you may not have the same amount of workforce either because of social distancing measures or because of illness or shielding or vulnerability or because of the economic impact. Added together, this amounts to an unprecedented challenge which requires an unprecedented approach. And there's not just the business sitting on this. It's not just about the business. Actually, this is a strategic change in the way in which COVID-19 control is being handled in this country. Business will be taking the forefront of this, the brunt of it. Employees spend most of their waking lives at work in normal circumstances. With social distancing, that means that it's going to be even more the case that employees are likely to be exposed to hazards in the workplace. Employees are likely to get more harmful exposures at work than anywhere else. This is a general principle, but it's exacerbated by COVID-19 and other restrictions on social distancing. Employees are dependent on employers for well-being. So quite a lot of well-being services for employees come via the employer. And employers are the people who help form the behaviours of people and the skills that they have in terms of preparation. So taken together, this essentially means that the collective failure of workplaces, if workplaces are not successful in dealing with COVID-19, then there will be another peak and another lockdown. The responsibility is really being heaped on employers. And the legal responsibilities are higher, not lower. There isn't a relaxation of standards just because COVID-19 has broken out. There are the same statutory requirements under the Health and Safety at Work Act. The same regulations apply. But at the same time, we're supposed to be more aware. We're supposed to be aware of the risks in relation to COVID-19 and these additional risks because of the extended shutdown. And we're supposed to keep on top of monitoring and inspection, and the inspectorates, the public bodies involved, will also be doing their part in this. So in terms of business continuity, there are a whole series of things. A need to focus on measures, including worker health protection. There is going to be a need, in addition, to understand not only the overt ways in which we look after health, but the latent management of health, the way in which people working together in teams can enhance or protect health. With social distancing, with smaller teams, this is going to be impacted. And the other thing is that COVID-19 measures and precautions are going to be an unusually intrusive dimension of work. And these could be a distraction from normal safety and normal health measures. Add to that within a networked environment where many services are sold in, then a lot of the services that people rely on to ensure that their safety is maintained, that hygiene is maintained, may be interrupted as well. So what's the answer? The answer to this dwells within communication and joined up thinking. It's easy for a business, both in terms of its leadership and its workforce, to come to the conclusion that health is a secondary, because if you haven't got a job, you haven't got well-being. It's important that businesses and workforces work together with a view that resilience and sustainability is actually a really important dimension of this, and the health of the workforce is at the heart of that. Inclusive problem solving. A lot of the problems that will be faced by businesses have never been faced in this way before. Drawing on the whole knowledge of the workforce will help. Stakeholder engagement, making sure that everybody who you work with can be brought in to that problem solving approach and buy in to your approaches to worker health. Using the expertise you already have. The wrong answers are often the ones you go searching for when the right ones are staring you in the face. And of course, many businesses have expertise in some aspects of health and safety. However, these are unprecedented times. These are unique circumstances. One can't heap it on one person alone within an organization to solve. And often the problems are ones that go beyond the ones that can be solved by your own expertise. And this is where expert knowledge actually comes in. And at this point, I think it's time to hand over to the expert. So over to Alex.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Hello, everyone. I'm not sure what I'm defined as an expert in, but while we're just handing over control of the slides, I would like to thank the experts and the people that did contribute to this guidance, because it's very much a team effort. Yeah, there's lots of good thought and lots of good work went into it, and with a pretty quick turnover as well. So from my perspective, thank you to everyone that had a part to play in this work. Unfortunately, still can't flick through. Okay, I think we're right now. So basically, the next session, as Kevin said, is to maybe go over some of the, I guess, some of the content of the guidance after that solid introduction from Kevin. And it's really to kind of think on the key aspects of what we're trying to get over in the guidance, and providing that steer on the approach that we've suggested people can consider, but taking into account the kind of foundation which a lot of the occupational hygiene is built on, which is using the hierarchy of control and thinking about the wider context of the hazards and risks that are applicable and apparent in your workplace. So thinking about the three-pronged approach that we've kind of put together in the guidance is really trying to take into account the different aspects of assessing the risks with regards to the new situation that we find ourselves in. So from the outset, we've said it's important that we don't just produce another COVID-19 guide, but that we align the information to the other hazards and the other risks which are already in our workplace, and that we build that in together in order to create a safe and healthy working environment by applying the three different aspects of the COVID risk, the safe start, but also the existing risks that are apparent in your workplace. And obviously they change depending on the different types of workplaces that you're in. So the three-pronged approach is really, as I said just before, it's underpinned by the cornerstone of what we use in our hygienist toolkit, which is the hierarchy of control. And the principles stay the same. And this example here is a visual example that most of you will recognize as the kind of the norm in terms of the hierarchy of control, with a small kind of an upturned triangle. However, we felt for this particular piece of work, it's actually a good idea to think about it in a slightly different way. So taking the triangular shape and kind of thinking about it in more of a dynamic situation where you need to apply and adapt to suit the workplace as it evolves throughout this time of returning to work. Because what happens this week will be very different to what happens in 6 weeks' time. So it's very much preparing to have that kind of dynamic overview when you're thinking about applying the principles of hierarchy of control. However, the key aspects is the top principles of the most effective really still remain. The elimination, the reduction, the isolation, those aspects are still really there, and they're the ones that it's always best to try and achieve that. And how you define some of those is up to you, and how you roll some of those out is up to you. But they can be supported by other aspects of the hierarchy, and most of the time in combination with other control measures. But again, the way you think about them can be different. So you can have preventative controls, you can have mitigating controls. Ideally, we would like to have preventative controls, but in some circumstances, that's not always the case. So again, important to really think about how you combine and support each other. I think when you put your risk assessments and your control plans in place, we can't just think that it's back to the old normal. There's a new phrase going around now, isn't there, which is the new normal. So we've got to really look at ways to innovate new control opportunities through applying the hierarchy of control. And this is something that I've been communicating in my current workplace, is that we can't just go to PPE. We can't just say to people, put a mask on and get on with your job. We need to look at innovating ways to reduce contact, to promote hygiene, and to see how we can work safely and promote a healthy environment as we're doing that. But there's no wrong or there's no right answer. Every workplace is different. So the workplace that I support is very different to the workplace that you support. So in doing this, it's what works best and what fits best for you, but using the principles of the hierarchy of control to achieve the best options for your particular situation. And as I said before, those will no doubt change as you move and progress through the return to work process, as things update and more people come back to work or processes change, etc. So just picking up on a couple of examples with regards to restart, I think that this was something that when the working group got together, it was something that we really wanted to consider and include as part of this guidance, that it's not just a cold restart only considering COVID. This is a restart considering your other aspects of the hazards in your workplace, and it's probably the kind of bit that we felt we could achieve good value with regards to the guidance. So we'll touch on a couple of examples as part of this, because we can't stay online forever. So there are plenty of hazards that are around in your workplace on your risk profiles, whether it is restarting plant and equipment or reoccupying a building. Most of those, as I said, you will know. They will be part of your risk profile in the workplace. You'll have control plans in place, and that you will work to them under normal operation. However, we need to think about if that's changed. So how has it changed? Well, the fact that some of these systems have been sat dormant for a considerable amount of time, perhaps days, perhaps even weeks, we need to take that into account. If you've not had the luxury of having facility or maintenance teams going into your workplace to attend some of these systems, then again, the risk could even be higher of exposure to a number of hazards. If they have been maintained, that's fantastic, but there obviously, as an introduction of the workforce back into the workplace occurs, we need to make sure we manage those accordingly. And again, going back to the control bits, everyone's restart risks will be different. So it's important that you look at your risk profiles, you consider all the particular agents here. And again, it's not just the chemical and the physical, biological, but it may be even some of the psychosocial aspects with regards to returning to work, to look at what you may need to do to make sure you have a managed and controlled restart to your working environment. And unfortunately, we saw in the news just under a couple of weeks ago that mistakes do happen, and unfortunately tragedies do occur, such as the LG styrene leak that occurred in India on the 7th of May. Yeah, unfortunately, as it says there, people lost their lives and a number of people were made ill. And it was put down to an accident caused by poor restart activities. So these things do happen, and unfortunately, we need to make sure that we're on the ball and we're on the job. So if you have any ideas, any case studies that you'd like to share with the BOHS that we can review and possibly add to the guidance to share best practice between the profession and between industry, then that would be something that we'd really like to see from you and receive from you, and the working group can review that and potentially update the guidance to take that into account. So there's a bit of an ask there with regards to people getting involved and supplying some examples and case studies if that is possible. So we're just going to touch now on 3 examples, and the first one that we thought was something that, again, we might not always think about is the human aspect. So that kind of the psychosocial aspect of returning to work after a considerable amount of time away from that workplace. And it could be that some individuals have not actually been to work for 2 to 3 months, which is not a lot longer than a normal holiday, a lot longer than just a short bout of sickness. It's something which is a significant amount of time off. And although individuals and employees will feel that they are familiar with the workplace, there'll be a number of things that will change and that will have to change as part of this return to work scenario that we find ourselves in. And not just from the COVID aspect, but from other things as well. So it's really important to align employees with good knowledge and good awareness, so that they are provided with the knowledge and information they need to make sure that they can perform and they can do their part with regards to the return to work piece. And the guidance picked out these 5 kind of principles really of the inform, motivate, enable, unblock and review to really kind of empower employees moving forwards. And we've produced a little checklist in the Appendix 7 just to kind of use as either an induction or a little awareness pack of staff coming back to work, and treating it really as more or less a new site induction where significant changes have occurred. So again, useful information if people require it. The next one, local exhaust ventilation systems, or LEV. It's kind of part and parcel of a lot of occupational hygienists' busy lives, I'm sure. But they are very complex systems, and they all have a part to play in the efficient working of our system. So each component part of an LEV is as important as the other. So to make sure that systems like extraction systems are working properly and effectively to protect employees and to remove hazards from restart and from our normal day-to-day risks, it's important that we consider just doing some simple performance reviews and pre-use checks on our systems to make sure they're going to be operating as efficiently as we require them to be. So that there isn't a collection of dusts in ducting, the air cleaners are not blocked, the fans not seized up after a period of non-operation. All that kind of stuff is really important to make sure that we do that. And the short checklist that we've put into Appendix 8 is very much just building on what's in HSG 258, which is kind of part and parcel of the guidance that we get from the HSE. So again, it's good things to consider. And what I would consider here is that you need competent and qualified individuals to help you with this work if you don't have access to those people. This is an important part of the competence framework that we have as professionals, is to make sure that people have the good competencies in those areas. And the third one that has been mentioned a little bit before by a number of groups and associations is water systems in the workplace. And I guess in particular, we always talk about it, is Legionella. Another one to think about could be metalworking fluids and bacteria growth in waterborne metalworking fluids. But we just thought we'd pick on this one as an example, and there's been some great guidance out there already from the LCA and from the Water Management Society, and the BOHS work alongside those associations to make sure that we have good competency frameworks and good training in place so that people can do a good job. And really, this thing is considering the fact that, again, if you don't have facilities and maintenance teams going in there and maintaining your water systems, there is a risk here of significant bacteria growth in stagnant, untreated water systems, be it just simple domestic water systems or going up to processed waters or cooling towers. So again, put simple things in place to manage the risk, and just to consider the points there of the flushing, disinfection, cleaning, and supporting that through appropriate testing, following the ACOP, following the guidance that we get from the HSE is really important there. And I guess considering a bit further afield is to think of some of your restart plans that you've got anyway for some of your equipment from a Legionella control aspect. Your written control schemes, what do they say? But actually, how do they need to be adapted moving forwards? So as part of the restart, what's different, what needs changing, but also to be prepared to think about the future of your workplace. There's already talk in a number of organisations about how many offices will actually reopen with regards to full human population because of the push to work from home. So does that mean that you have to think about the fact that you've gone from 100% working population in an office to 25% of that population? So how many dead legs showers are you going to have in welfares, for example? What about the number of processed water units and equipment that you might have in place? How much of those will become infrequently used and more or less become a dead leg in its own self? So lots of things to think about there. But again, it's really important to use competent, trained professionals to help you with this work. So from a Legionella perspective, your water treatment companies, your Legionella risk assessors, again, very important to make sure that going through these written control schemes, doing the disinfections and the cleanings, doing the testing, that we use competent service providers to help us achieve that if we need that level of advice. So that was just 3 examples that we pulled out of the guidance. But again, we're always looking for other examples. So please get in touch if you have got any. And really, just there to summarize that kind of bit for me, is that I think the current pandemic has challenged us to actually rethink how we manage risks in the workplace and how we can adapt the hierarchy of control to help us manage those risks. And thinking of those 3 aspects of risk, underpinning it with that hierarchy of control, is the key message in this guidance. I think we need to be prepared to create a new way of working, but we need to be prepared to be dynamic with what we choose and what we select as a way to move forward. Things are moving very, very quickly, and things will continue to change at a rate that we have probably not seen in a long, long time. So we hope you found this webinar interesting. We hope you find the guidance useful. And we've had some good feedback so far, and we're always open to feedback and for, as I said, extra case studies and examples. So we look forward to kind of hearing from you on that aspect. And I think we're going to hand over to Lee to manage any questions that we come in. So that is it from me. Okay, Lee, did we get any questions?
Yep, I'm just having a look now, and there's nothing through yet, but I'll give it another minute or 2.
Okay. If you've got any questions, please drop them on the question link if you'd like to. Obviously, the high number of people that we've got on the call, it'd be easier to do the questions via the question function. We did actually, while they might be coming in, if you've got any, we did receive a couple of questions prior to the webinar, because we asked people to do that. Just to go over those with you now, if while you're waiting. So one question was with regards to kind of the impact of COVID on kind of high-risk employees and the risk of people being kind of hospitalized because of certain exposures, and it's a really nice technical question. So what we will do is we're going to strive to put together a Q&A document off the back of this webinar. So we'll probably give a full technical answer to that one, because we only received that one about 5 minutes prior to the webinar. So we'll give a full answer to that one moving forwards. But another question we had, what advice can we give to organisations that currently deliver face-to-face group training? So I think from that perspective, again, it's thinking about how you currently deliver work and how you can adapt and change that in order to manage the risk. So I am aware of a number of training providers carrying out distant learning. And one of my colleagues did a BOHS module last week via distant learning, and she seemed to find it an okay way of doing it. But again, it depends on what kind of training you do. So obviously, as things move forward, is looking to adapt where you can from that particular perspective. And we had another question as well with regards to some of the control aspects that we'd written in the hierarchy definitions, obviously around elimination and isolation and things like that. And I think obviously this is guidance. This isn't, we're not telling you to do every single thing in the document. And some of our tiers of how it's defined probably do cross over somewhat with regards to how you interpret and how you define elimination and isolation and things like that. So it's very just obviously trying to take things into perspective, and how you define elimination. You could be very high level, which is removing the virus, or it could be lower task base, which is removing an individual and eliminating that particular exposure. So again, it is an open arena there, and we've just got to try and work around that, and again, allow yourselves to adapt the best you can and use the guidance in the way that you need to use it for your particular workplace. So hopefully that's given an answer to those three that we had.
We have some questions through. The first one is, can you give a view on the legal obligations? Do you think it is important to stress the legal obligations to manage risk, or is it a hearts and mind matter, or both?
Do you want me to take that one up?
I was going to say, as the lawyer and professor in law, I'll let you do the legal side.
I think it would be irresponsible of anyone not to remind people that there is a strong legal reason for doing a lot of this. It would be tragic if people tried to muddle through and then ended up falling foul of the predatory type of people like lawyers. There is a hearts and mind element, and law on its own won't do things, but I think it is making absolutely clear that there's a legal obligation, that they haven't gone away, not as a threat, but just as one of those risks. It's a business risk. The hearts and mind element is really important because that common vision about the future is vital to the sustainability of businesses. But I think we can't feather bed it. It's going to be hard for a lot of businesses after this is all finished.
And I've got another one here. Do you see this changing the workplace in the long term, significantly increase in working from home? And what impact will this have on health, with numbers of home-based working becoming significant?
Well, personally, I think we definitely are going to see a change, I think, on people working from home, especially in the short term and medium term. As I mentioned before, in terms of adapting the way a building's used moving forward, we could see a number of offices that are dramatically downsized because of this, and a number of workplaces downsized as well in terms of number of people. So I think it's a case of it's a watch this space, but as health professionals, what can we offer? What can occupational hygienists offer there? And that's again supporting people working from home, such as from an ergonomic perspective and that kind of psychosocial perspective as well, that we kind of often get pulled into these days as kind of the wider kind of health and safety community are picking up some of that aspects as well. And then preparing people for when they do go into the workplace. So I actually work from home a lot, and then I have to be aware when I move to a site-based role for a day or two that I'm picking up the things that they have in place to manage risks on their site. So it's adapting that way, I think, is something that we need to think about and just kind of take things into account and keep an eye on what is happening moving forwards. Don't know if, Kevin, you've got anything else for that particular one.
I think it's worth remembering that until the pandemic is finished, then the default will be work at home if you can. And that is something that's a fundamental shift in the way in which we work. And that's a legal obligation. It's not just a moral obligation. So inevitably, it will have a long-term effect, because until there is the eradication of the virus for practical purposes, then that will be the default. And and the economic impact will certainly model that way. That will eventually lead to a whole set of other problems, social and health problems with people working at home. So I think this is here to stay for a long time. The length of a lease would be the sort of time that I think some businesses will be thinking.
Have you got any advice on the safest way to go about workplace air monitoring and noise exposure surveys for consultants, given that these often involve close contact?
So yeah, it's a good question. I think what consultants need to start considering is making sure that their risk assessments and their RAMs take these things into account. You can build up your own set of documentation and a set of measures that you would be happy to work to and perform, and then work with your potential customers in order to achieve something that fits their site requirements and also fits your personal and your team's requirements. So something that I actually was discussing yesterday with a site that we're looking to put a tender for, that we said, well, we're going to have to produce RAMs that include COVID now, not just the normal RAMs and risk assessments that we'd like to see from these particular consultants. So it's a really good question. I think that could be a topic that we could look to build into the guidance to some extent, or at least have some information there ready for members. If people have got examples of what they're doing with regards to being COVID ready as an occupational hygiene service provider, then please share those. But I definitely think it's something that we need to take into consideration. Every site's different, so I don't think I can list a bullet points, but it's just having something in place for you that you feel comfortable with.
Do you have any specific advice for maintaining traditional OH monitoring services while adhering to social distancing measures?
So Lee, haven't we just answered that question?
No, the previous one was the workplace air monitoring, wasn't it?
Okay, all right. Well, I think it's very similar to that previous question. That maintaining the occupational hygiene services that a lot of our members do, it's making sure that we can provide the RAMs and the risk assessments to show how we would cope with COVID, and then working with the customer to make sure that we fit their site requirements. Looking at ways to make sure you can achieve social distancing as much as possible. Obviously, setting up equipment on a person is fairly close contact, but it can be very short term, and you can move away and observe from a distance. But these are all things that, again, it will change depending on the workplace.
Can you please discuss the fact that insurers may also need assurance that workplace can commence? This may vary with location due to devolved governments.
I'm quite happy to pick that one up. Insurers are actually in a very strong position in this regard, because right through the UK, insurance contracts are what are called contracts of utmost faith. So the duty is on the insured to notify the insurer of any risks. So the risk assessment is not only very sensible for the management of risks in actuality, it's a requirement that the risk assessment is shared with insurers, or the outcomes are, and that any new risks are disclosed to the insurer. Many commercial insurances are predicated on the notion that if you fail to declare a risk, you lose your insurance. So the boot is very much on the other foot. That there are slight technical differences in the way in which insurance companies contracts are negotiated, but from the point of view of an employer or a business, doing a risk assessment, but also talking to the insurers about what insurable risks there might be is going to be really important. Again, it's one of those horrible things that insurance provides the service, but the real challenge will be if people haven't properly risk assessed, they haven't declared risks they consider to be there to the insurance companies, so that the underwriters can make an adjustment in terms of the actual commensurate risk. The other possibility is, of course, that the insurance companies have a fundamental underwriting by the government. That is highly unlikely. I've never heard it happen before. So I think a message about insurance: make sure your insurance company is one of the partners who you're talking to about risk.
Thank you. There's another question here. Should employers ensure their staff have critical medicals with occupational health surveillance before restarting work, field-based engineering, manufacturing, assembly, etc.?
So this is definitely a question for our occupational health colleagues, but it would be something that I would suggest that you definitely look into. The Society of Occupational Medicine have produced some guidance with regards to returning to work, and it is very clinically focused. So that might be an area that you wish to look at and to contact your occupational health service provider. But if you think about the fact that these individuals might not, as I said, might not have been at work for a significant period of time, if there are key risks in the workplace that are safety critical, then you may require a level of safety critical medical in order to pass certain people off. So definitely something that I would speak to your occupational health professionals about. And it's something that, again, you can work into your return to work plan as part of that kind of personal employee briefing and reintroduction piece.
And then we have a two-parter here. A lot of employers will have a temporary work from home risk assessment in place, as the thinking is that we will move from working from home more long term. At what point should employers move from a temporary working from home risk assessment to a more regular working from home risk assessment? That's part one of the question.
Great question.
I can tell you the legal answer.
Go on then.
Well, legally speaking, and for your insurance purposes and in terms of liability, as soon as you believe that it's actually likely that someone's going to be, or a workforce is likely to be long term in a different situation, then you have to reassess the risks. And if you don't reassess the risks, you're not doing what a reasonable employer would do. The moment you can foresee something, then you become responsible for it. That might not be the right answer in occupational hygiene terms, but it's the standard that would be expected of the reasonable employer.
Yeah, and I think just to go off the back of Kevin's point there, when to define something as being long-term or fixed compared to temporary is a good question to ask. I guess there is a level here as to say, well, as part of the return to work piece, how will we define home working in the future? Some organisations now actually have a flexible working policy anyway, which kind of means that although you might on your contract be classed as an office-based worker, that there is flexibility for you to work at home. However, there's a level of risk assessment that's required to do that. I guess the key thing it could be here is for the management and HR to make a decision on how they define people's contracts, if it is a home worker or if it's an office-based worker. Perhaps if those contracts and terms are updated, that's when there's also a consideration from a risk perspective. But I guess the temporary risk assessment may not pick up on all things, but really should pick up on the majority of things moving forwards. I guess the longer term piece is what further equipment and controls are required in order to maintain and provide a safe and healthy working environment at home, such as from a setup of your office and things like that. So great question. I'm not sure we can give an exact deadline, but hopefully those points have been useful.
And then the second part to that question was, how does an employer risk assess from a DSC point of view competently if social distancing isn't lifted ahead of the change point from temporary working from home to more regular working from home?
So yeah, again, so this is a trust issue, and it's the thing where you can issue employees with DSC assessments as part of a DSC training program, for example. So give them some DSC awareness, give them a DSC assessment tool to help them assess their setup in the home work environment. and feed that back into the managers, line managers, and health and safety teams, and to assess the results of that assessment. The key thing, obviously, generally, it's very, very hard for line managers to go to the homes of every single employee and things like that. So there's options to take photos. Again, you could use some kind of level of, say, like a 5S system where you do a DSC assessment, you take a picture of your workplace and you establish that as your standard and how you work in your office. So there's ways of obviously passing information backwards and forwards with your line manager and the health and safety kind of support team to facilitate good DSC assessment and things like that.
Nothing new that's come through, so we can give it another minute, see if there's any last questions.
Yeah, and well, just pick up on that one. I've just saw that one from Fred. So as I said, there's been a number of organisations that have produced guidance for return to work, as well as other hygiene related ones. So our colleagues in America have got the Back to Work Safely website, where they've pulled out some guidance for certain workplace areas. And again, they've taken a slightly different tact, which is not always nice to not have the same approach. So we've gone down the risk assessment hierarchy of control perspective, and AIHA have gone down the workplace focus and things like that. So lots and lots of information out there.
Well, I think it's been very good to have your questions and feedback. I think one of the wonderful things will be any further feedback on the guidance so that we can improve what we're doing and improve the way in which we assist people. I'd just like to thank you very much for spending some time with us this afternoon. Apologies for a few gremlins, and please do get in touch with your observations or case studies, etc. Thanks to Alex and thanks to the team at BOHS Head Office. I hope you have a pleasant evening and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you everyone.